Remember all the times they told us it couldn't be done?
Time and again, Democrats have reached across the aisle to fix our immigration system.
Want us to work together in a bipartisan manner.
I pushed very hard for bipartisan agreement.
How can a bill be dead on arrival? They don't even know what solutions are being proposed in terms of addressing the challenges at the border.
We're trying to do everything that we can to make sure that we deal with what's going on at the border. There's bipartisan support.
But there wasn't a serious bipartisan effort to address it.
That bipartisan border security bill, it would have provided more border security.
The result was a bipartisan bill with the toughest set of border security reforms we've ever seen.
Look at the chaos that's unfolded at the southern border, and they just want Congress to do something about it because
First active duty troops have now arrived at the southern border.
For ICE, the agency arresting nearly 300 illegal immigrants on Saturday alone and nearly 1,000 on Sunday.
We're getting an exclusive first-hand look at the latest Trump administration deportation flight from El Paso, Texas to Ecuador.
As that aperture opens, there'll be more arrests nationwide.
But look on your screen because these are the number of arrests and actions that have been taken in just week one.
And Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, says military planes will deport every migrant every day.
Border Patrol agents told us they had 0 gotaways. That is the first time in years, Bill.
Wow. And live from Times Square is That Kevin Show.
Somewhere in the bowels of the city that never sleeps,
Kevin McCullough, radio host with Salem Media,
is a man also not sleeping.
Syndicated radio talk show host Kevin McCullough.
And that guy would like a word with you.
Many of you know him as Vostradamus.
Of course that Kevin show is going to be great. The only thing that could be greater, of course, would be That Donald Show. We don't have that, so we have That Kevin Show.
Featuring the music of Dick Tunney and the Dream in Color Orchestra. Straight ahead, elections are back. Breaking news and government corruption. John Rogers, Sean Spicer, and Jay Green are here. Coming up, what's happening with the war on energy? Gabriella Hoffman weighs in. Sketch comedy from Dude Dad and Nick Peterson. And for his 4th year in a row, Zach Williams is back in the spotlight. And now, from Times Square, a man who swore off any form of a Tesla Cybertruck, unless, that is, Uncle Sam would pay for it. Here's the...
I don't remember swearing off a Cybertruck.
Oh, no?
I don't remember doing that. No, I'm not saying I didn't. I don't remember saying that publicly. I remember thinking that they were ugly. And my kids gave me grief because my boys are into Minecraft, and the Tesla Cybertruck looks like something that belongs in the world of Minecraft. In fact, that's what they say. Oh, it's the Minecraft car. Now, I don't care if it is or not. It doesn't strike me one way or the other. They don't look like something I would want to drive unless I was given one. So you're right on that.
Fair enough.
But you know who's wrong on the issue of the Cybertrucks? Go ahead, ask me.
Who would that be? Who would be wrong?
No, not my bride, not my kids. Rachel Maddow.
Elon Musk has apparently somehow convinced the United States government, specifically the United States Department of State, that the taxpayers of the United States of America should spend $400 million buying, quote, armored Tesla production units. Isn't it great and definitely not at all illegal or profoundly corrupt? Definitely not ripping us all off to pay themselves, right?
He seems to think that Mr. Tesla himself, Elon Musk, or at least she's pretending to think this and trying to make the rest of the world think it. And I'm not sure if she's too ignorant to know the difference or if she's legitimately trying to deceive you. But in either case, it's bad. Because not according to what Rachel Maddow said right there, but according to the facts, Elon Musk didn't ask anything of Donald Trump for Tesla. Joe Biden gave him the deal. He said, here's 400 whatever million. we will buy Cybertrucks from you. For this amount of money, we'll get however many Cybertrucks you can give us. Boom. Done deal. Joe Biden did that deal. Joe Biden that Elon Musk campaigned against. And I guarantee you, Rachel Maddow, if Joe Biden had won the election and Elon Musk was in the White House with his kids doing the press conferences talking about government corruption, you wouldn't be saying a peep. You hate Elon Musk working with Donald Trump. You hate it. And you hate it because you know that you can't do anything about it. And you also know something else. You know that he is finding all kinds of garbage. Lee Zeldin gets appointed to the EPA this last week. He finds $20 billion in monies that the former administration was just trying to dish out as fast as they could before they got out of office. Releases a whole video of what the money was spent on. He's getting it back, by the way. He's calling it the gold bars. He's getting the gold bars back on the ship. Doge, item after item, everything they've found so far. These people are insulting these 19 and 21-year-old kids that are doing a better job of accounting for the government's resources than the longtime accountants that have been in these departments supposedly keeping track of our resources. The fact that 19 and 21-year-old nerd posses are having more success, they think it's a reason to hate on the 19 and 21-year-olds. Go nerd posses. More nerd posses, please. We need them. They are saving our bacon. National Institutes of Health. In the second hour tonight, Jay Green's going to come talk to me about this, but I have a feeling that the National Institutes of Health have been ripping us off. I saw some statistics this week. They charge like 5 times the amount of overhead for research projects that private universities and hospitals charge. Public hospitals, public universities, almost 60 cents on the dollar. Private hospitals, private institutions, 8 cents on the dollar. Why have they been allowed to do that? How have they been able to rip us off like that? It's pretty astounding. FEMA's given money to terrorists. USAID's funding gender ideology studies everywhere. They're mad because we're onto them and we're uncovering it. And they didn't all used to be mad. Take a look at this right here from one Elizabeth Warren.
Talking to someone who spent many years as a prosecutor, and he said, you know, when that much money disappears, it's usually because somebody broke some laws somewhere. But if we don't look, if we don't ask, if we don't uncover it and make it all public, we'll never find out.
Where is the criminal investigation that needs to happen here?
I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I just haven't seen it at all. What the government didn't do is it didn't turn around and say, you lost how much money and you wiped out how many pensions and you wiped out how many jobs? I want to know who did what, whether or not any laws were violated, where the gaps are in the system that would permit this to happen. I want to hold somebody responsible. Responsibility is not just about blame. Responsibility is about making sure we fix this and it will not happen again.
Oh, I'm very sure. She wants to understand the laws and the gaps and have people take responsibility to make sure that it never happens again until it turns out that it's her people that have been doing it. And now when someone really has come along, truly from the outside, a non-Washingtonian at all in Elon Musk and his gaggle of brilliant kids, they are coming along and finding all of the corruption that you could ask for and more. And friends, it's a glorious thing. We are shining the light where the cockroaches are, and they are fleeing. And that's what we have to do. If we're going to crawl back the money that we've just been throwing away on terrorists and gender ideology and overcharge for overhead and item after item of just throwing the money out like the Biden team did at the end of their I am so happy we have RFK and Tulsi and Cash and all these people in place because they are not going to let it keep going on. At least for the next 2 to 4 years, we're going to have some degree of accountability on what needs to be happening here. And I couldn't be happier. I just couldn't be happier. Friends, don't believe the hype. Don't believe the Rachel Maddows. Elon Musk didn't rip off the American people, and his contract with Tesla is not in violation of anything. It's not a violation of anything. Biden gave him the contract. He and Trump have nothing to do with it. That was Biden's decision. So, having said that, we've got a lot to talk about because a lot of our conversation tonight is going to stem around this very corruption, and I think it's going to be rather impactful, and I think you're going to learn some stuff. We've also got a great show for you straight ahead. Zach Williams is back in the music spotlight tonight. He has a brand new song and couldn't wait to come on the show to share it with us. Looking forward to that. Plus some funny stuff for your Valentine's weekend from Dude Dad. And we've got the inimitable Nick Peterson in the house. In fact, he's going to be with us live in person probably another week or so. Anyway, Kevin McCullough, great show. Stay here.
From New York, that Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back to Times Square. It's Kevin McCullough. Glad to have you with us. And, you thought you were done when the presidential race was over, but you're not. In the year after a presidential race, there are very important races that are still on the ballot. And while you may not think they really matter, they actually do, because gubernatorial races, races for state Supreme Courts, these types of things have a way of impacting different regions of the country. And it is out of the all politics is local ethos that you get the national politicians. So I'm very pleased to have John Rogers joining us. From America First Works. He is the executive director of AFW. As recently, Ashley Hayek has been promoted to president of AFW. And so we're excited to have John with us. She's going to be back with us here in a couple of weeks. John, it's good to meet you. Thank you for being here. I know a lot of people, they got through November and they're like, oh, good. We don't have to worry about anything for a while. If you're in New Jersey or Virginia or even Wisconsin, that's not necessarily the case. What are the most important things for everyone to know about the races that are on the ballot for 25?
I mean, the most important thing is for especially listeners to this show is to get out and vote. What you see is at no point in time in history has one of these local races matched the turnout level of a presidential race. And it's that apathy that, maybe we get burnt out from the presidential race. Some folks are just like, yeah, I'm a federal only voter. I don't vote in the rest of the races. The most important thing is to get out and vote. Whenever the race is, there's some really hot races that are going on right now. I think one of which is flying a little bit under the radar screen. I'll get to that in a second. I think one of the hot races to focus on right now is the New Jersey governor's race. That's coming up this fall in November. We've got a great shot of winning that. It is probably the most overtaxed state in the nation, maybe the most overtaxed state in the history of any nation. And I think that one of the things that goes on our side of the aisle is that we just don't buy it until it's too late. We looked at this 4 years ago, and it wasn't until about 10 days out that anybody started to believe that we could win this race. And to me, outside of voting, it's like belief is the most.
John, here's the thing. And I was at Jack Ciattarelli's campaign event that night, the night that the election was held. It was a diabolically carbon copy of the 2020 presidential election. You had a lead with the Republican going into the late hours. They stopped counting in one big county in the north, Bergen County, and lo and behold, the next morning there was a 30,000 to nothing vote swing from banked vote. Somebody knew that they were in their back pocket, and you woke up and he lost by 10,000. That was a shame, and it happened right in front of us, and we just seen it happen the year before. It was like, come on, anyone paying attention here?
Yep. I think we got to take a page out of the 2024 playbook, which is, number one, let's make this thing too big to rig. Number two, we've got to beat them at their own game on getting out there early, getting paper ballots out there. Part of the thing that goes there, you can still vote these paper ballots in person. So it's not even like you have to trust the Postal Service in order to get your vote counted. You can get there in person and vote. and get your vote banked away before the Democrats have a chance of stealing your vote, I think is a really important point that we've got to get good at. But I think the biggest thing is, getting out there and voting and making this thing too big to rig just from the get-go.
That's the New Jersey race. What's going on in Virginia?
Virginia governor is still taking shape right now. It looks like Glenn Youngkin, the current governor, is term limited out, so won't be running again. Right now, Winsome Sears, who's the lieutenant governor, seems to be an early driver's seat on that race, to be determined if a real primary wields itself there. I think that's going to be a hot race from start to finish. Again, we can't let the liberals have us believe that this is an unwinnable race and outside of reach. Not at all. It's absolutely a winnable race. It's a seat that, it's a state that we can hold. It doesn't have to be a blue state. Not that long ago, it was a red state. And, part of this is getting involved, getting conservative groups up and running and involved in these states where we have these races before, the ethos starts to believe that we can't do this.
Yeah. Back to New Jersey just for a second. It does look like there are a lot of candidates in the primary on both sides. What is your sense? What is your handicap about how intense the primary battles are going to be?
So we recently surveyed this, and Citarelli has a pretty decent sized lead in the Republican primary. I think money will probably play out there to see if that develops a little bit more, but given how close he came last time around, I feel like the voters are like, okay, he came close last time. Let's give this another go. The Democrat side is a food fight. I mean, it's an open, it's open warfare on their side as to who gets there. Right now, early lead is probably Mikey Sherrill, but it's a pretty tenuous lead at this point in time. I think that the Dem side of this is a pure toss up on who gets out of there. What brand of crazy they put forth on their side, and who can run further left is probably what that primary is going to be all about. Well,
and then whoever does win that fight, they have to come back to the center and present to the large number of independents that are in New Jersey a reasonable face. So unlike the center right side of this debate that don't have to change much by way of philosophy, you have to have some pretty wild public policy swings just within a few months' time if you're a Democrat seeking office in New Jersey.
That's exactly right. And you have to go on the record during the primary in order to, espouse these radical left views to make your way through the primary. It is actually a real problem for them, and it's why tracking footage and these debates are really critical, because they just fight to get further left and then they fight to get to the center once they make it through the primary. And we can't let them get away with that. Part of this is funds. We need to have these campaigns. It's one of the unfortunate realities of politics today is how expensive these races are. And New Jersey is two media markets that are two of the most expensive media markets in the country.
The fact that you live in New Jersey, but you have to pay for New York and Philadelphia television is just a crime.
It's bonkers. It's so expensive to run a campaign here and to get your message out. So if the other side is the only one that's funded, that's what makes these things difficult, which is why I think for folks, in DC and super PACs and, everybody who's interested in this, believe early. And because early money actually goes a lot farther because the market rates go up as the campaign gets further on. So if you decide 2 weeks before the election that you're going to go buy Philly TV, it's going to cost you twice as much as if you made that decision today.
You're familiar with Scott Pressler and his work, his former Democrat that flipped a lot of registrations in Pennsylvania in the presidential race. He has made New Jersey a focus of where he wants to be for the next 12 months. Have you seen any of his numbers, and are they holding up to what you expect?
Yeah, the early registration numbers for this year, for December, January, look great. I think it's the first time that Republicans have out-registered Democrats in as long as I can remember. So there's definitely something going on there, whether it's a combination of Pressler and just people starting to believe that what President Trump is doing is working and they want to be part of that. President Trump barely lost the state. It actually was a lot.
It was way closer than people realized. Hold that thought right there, John Rogers.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough. From New York, that Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back to Times Square. Kevin McCullough, glad to have you with us. We're speaking with John Rogers of the America First Works division of AFPI. And again, lots of people in different places. Ashley Hayek has moved on to the presidency of America First Works, and she's doing a great job there. She'll be back with us in the next couple of weeks. But John, I was thinking, Trump closed the gap in New Jersey. He closed the gap in New York State by about 11 points. That was closer than anybody thought it was going to be. And when you look at the aggressive nature with which the DOJ audits and everything else that has taken place in a previous kind of season of politics in America, you would have thought that this would be a man who would be unpopular, because what you would see is the press really hammering him as hard as they possibly could. Right? I mean, that's what we think. And his approval rating seems to be holding. And the media doesn't like it, and the Democrats don't like it, but the American people are seeing what he's getting done and going, yeah, what about all of this recklessness on our tax dime?
That's exactly right. And to me, the most baffling thing is the Democrats are actually fighting it.
Yeah.
They're piling lawsuit after lawsuit trying to stop this from happening.
Well, it's their gravy train. They don't want to lose the funding.
And it's wildly popular with the American people. I mean, it's amazing to me to watch them literally trip over themselves to try and stop DOJ and the president from making the changes that the American people just voted for him to make.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me.
Well, I don't know how that's going to work its way, but it brings us to another important point, and that is that courts count. What do we know about judicial elections for 2025?
Yeah, the two hot ones for 2025, number one, which is coming, I think it's 55 days away on beginning of April, is the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. For anybody who is passionate about election integrity, worries about election integrity, this should be top on your list right now of things to do, which is to find a way to get involved in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. Right now, it's a 4-3 Dem bench. They are the bench that pushed through a lot of the sort of legalized cheating that went on, where they're just trying to pump as much paper, just like undocumented paper out onto the streets as they possibly can. And
when you say paper,
recourse.
You're talking about ballots, because under COVID protocols, they cheated big time.
I mean, they just were pumping as many ballots onto the streets as they possibly can with no accountability.
Yeah. It didn't matter if the person listed on it existed or if they still lived at the right address or any of that. It was just get it out there as much as possible. And
no
then
signature
the backside of that is they had two things. They had bad signature verification, and then they had harvesting operations. So if you don't have to prove who signed it and you can go gather them back all up again, you can do a lot. You can make a lot of mischief with that.
Yeah, and then you have a court that's like an activist Supreme Court that'll just back you up on it. They're like, yeah, you don't really need a signature for this. That's crazy, right? It's like, that's not what we should be doing here in America. Like, there are other countries where I think they paint your thumb purple in some states if you vote. And like, we can barely even get people to prove that they say who they are. God forbid that we do that. So this race is a really hot one. In 2023, one of these seats were up. It was at the time, the most expensive judicial race in the history of the United States of America. And we got grossly outspent. And they seem to be up to it again because they realize that this is, number one, their way that they can protect any of these ballot integrity measures, that they can just have a Supreme Court that's basically activist Democrats that are just going to back up anything that they're doing. Number two, abortion came in front of this court once and will come in front of it again. And so for anybody that cares about election integrity or abortion, this really matters. This also super duper matters because at some point in time, redistricting is going to come back around again. And this bench that we're electing now is going to be the ones that's going to be watching that. So they're going
to decide boundary lines.
Yeah, for congressional races. So they have the ability up there to draw one or two lines out if they so choose. And if they're anything like Pennsylvania, which I'll talk about in a second, if they're anything like Pennsylvania, the court can just up and make them redraw it if they wanted to, which is what happened in Pennsylvania. Another state that has Supreme Court races, 2 Dem retention races up this year. And that is about as activist the Dem bench as you're going to find in the world. They are active. Like they basically, there was a map that was accepted by the State House, the State Senate, and signed by the governor. And the state Supreme Court, which is effectively the Democratic Party in the state of Pennsylvania, just had them up and redraw it, and then drew Republican districts out magically.
Yeah, it was really a scandal. We covered that here. All right, Kevin McCullough thanking John Rogers for joining us for the first time. John, we'll talk to you again soon at AFPI. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
You got it. Kevin McCullough coming back from Times Square.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough. From New York, That Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back to Times Square. Kevin McCullough, glad to have you with us. That Kevin Show, and very glad to welcome back former press secretary for number 45, and someone who has been fighting the good fight in media ever since. You may have seen him on Newsmax. Now you see him on his terms. The Sean Spicer Show is the name of the broadcast. Sean Spicer rejoins us. Hello, sir.
Hey, good to see you, Kevin.
Thanks for coming on. I'm very excited about the prospect, and I love to talk with you and Kaylee and Sarah and some of these people about the new kids on the block. And when Karine Jean-Pierre came into the White House, you were very kind and gave us some observations, but you were also hesitant to be critical. Karoline Leavitt, I would love to know your thoughts on how she has really taken the office by storm and kind of with no apologies. What do you think of her style?
Yeah, well, let me back up a little. I think Karine Jean-Pierre may go down in history as the worst press secretary ever.
That is not what you were willing to say when you came on 4 years ago.
You know what? She's earned that. I mean, it was laughable, pathetic. I could go on.
Yeah.
You contrast this, and it's actually very similar to the overall arch of the Trump administration so far, which is that it's a massive contrast. A president who works, who we see every day, who we hear from every day, who's getting things done, putting points on the board, versus a president who we never actually would see sometimes for days on end. Same thing in the briefing room. Karine Jean-Pierre couldn't answer basic questions. She would carry around a binder, which probably caused massive back problems. It was so big. And in that binder weren't even the most basic answers. Right. She had no command of the issues. She had, by every stretch of the imagination, no access to the Oval Office. So that when she talked about the president, she hadn't seen him probably in days in most cases. The opposite's true with Karoline. She comes in, she has a command of the issues, she has a presence there, she has clear access to the president, which is your job, to speak in lieu of the principal. And I think she's doing an absolutely phenomenal job, not just from the podium, but the other reforms that she's ushering in to make the White House more accessible, more transparent. It's fantastic what she's done, and I give her all the credit in the world for how she's approaching this job.
Well, and I want to zero down on that a second, because the Pentagon made some waves when they kicked out NBC, NPR, Politico. And there was one other in there, I don't remember, but replaced them with the New York Times, replaced them with the New York Post, Huffington Post, Breitbart, and there was one other. I'm drawing a blank. But the idea that the old guard wasn't just going to get their press nooks just because they've always had them. This seems to be kind of a executive branch wide kind of philosophy that I don't know if Karoline's the one that's kind of instituting that across the board, but it certainly does seem to be taking place in different cabinet level press positions, and I think that's really healthy for the debate of the news of the day. No?
Yeah, let's just be clear though on a couple things. Let's take the DOD changes that you mentioned. this is about workspace, not access. They still have their badges. They can still go, but they had dominated. They had been for decades taking up space and not allowing anyone else in. And Pete Hegseth and the team over there, who I know fairly well, Sean Parnell and another buddy of mine named John Elliott are the head of public affairs over there. They're rotating. They created a rotational basis, which said NBC, Politico, Washington Post, New York Times, you guys don't get it all forever for nothing. Like, it's time to rotate you. So you still get your access. You can still cover us, but you don't get to have a monopoly on all the space so that no one else can have any. So I think this is a healthy thing. It's a rotation. And then on the briefing room, the opposite's true. I mean, Karoline is opening up the briefing room, giving more people, and this is something that she and I talked about extensively prior to Inauguration Day, is we believe in the First Amendment. The thing that's interesting, Kevin, that no one picked up on because no one wanted to, because they're selfish, is when Karine Jean-Pierre took away 400, we call hard passes from independent journalists to get into the White House, none of them said a peep, because ABC, CBS, they don't want it diluted. They want to make sure that they can toe a line and that everything that you see, read, and hear is dictated by them. The more people that see the same events and have a different perspective is not good for them. They want a monopoly on that. They want you to believe that everything President Trump says and does is horrible and bad, and that they don't want anyone else to show you the other side of what he's doing, why it's effective, why it's making us a better, stronger, more prosperous country. So they didn't sit. So despite all of them wrapping themselves in the First Amendment and media access and whatever, at the end of the day, when it really push came to shove, they said nothing. They were complicit. And that's why I love what Karoline's doing. She's additive. She's saying, hey, you guys stay, but I'm going to bring in more voices. I'm going to bring in different perspectives. And the idea that some of these guys might actually have a thought that would make them realize that there could be something different. And you recall when I was press secretary, I brought in Skype seats. I brought in reporters, not just reporters, but admittedly talk show hosts from around the country that couldn't make or didn't want to come to Washington, D.C., but have a constituency or audience, much like you do, that might have an issue that isn't getting addressed in the White House because of the pervasive beltway mentality that exists there.
I was favorably blessed to be on one of those Skype calls. And
there you go.
Yeah, I thought it was, and I'm hoping that that's what Karoline's leaning towards as well, because I don't think just everybody in the DC, geography has the best insight on all the questions.
Oh, absolutely not. But she's been bringing in other voices. She brought in Sage Steele the other day. Yeah. I know a lot of other independent, ruthless podcasts. Yeah, they're here in DC. But
did Sean Spicer apply for a credential? I want to know that for sure.
Yes, I'm putting in for credentials. I don't want to necessarily sit in that seat because I don't really care where I sit, and I'm not. Right. But not that I would turn it down. I probably should say to her, I'd love the seat at some point. Just because it guarantees you.
How wild it would be to see Sean Spicer in the front row asking Karoline Leavitt a question.
Right. No. Well, I did go to a previous press briefing and ask President Trump one. So, maybe it's time that I did that.
Let's turn the corner just a little bit. The rate at which, and you can put on your other hat now, the rate at which the administration is moving ahead with the audit, basically, of everything involving American government. This is one of the most brilliant things an administration has ever done.
And the problem is that it's being exposed, and and Democrats, I think, by and large, were hoping to keep this covered up for years, and didn't want anyone to expose this. And so I hope they do, because the American people, this isn't conservative or liberal or Democrat or Republican.
Right.
So much of what President Trump's doing is just common sense, Kevin.
Totally is. And Sean Spicer, we appreciate your time and insight on all of it. Thank you for fighting the good fight, and thank you for being back with us.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough.
I used to believe everything I'd see on the news, but that's before I discovered a brain.
A brain is meant for everyday use. Those living with moderate to severe stupidity have seen immediate improvement in common sense with a brain.
I thought the government had my best interests at heart, and then a friend told me about a brain.
Talk to your doctor about what news sources you obey. A brain may also lower your desire to take life-altering advice from celebrities.
Getting lectured about my carbon footprint from people with 3 private jets used to make sense. But thanks to a brain, now I can think for myself every day. When my disregard for third grade biology began to flare up, I knew it was time for a brain.
Do not try a brain if you're allergic to a brain. Common side effects may include accountability, discernment, homeschooling your kids, a better understanding of economics, awareness of the stupidity of socialism, and diarrhea.
For tethering yourself to reality, the only no-brainer is choosing a brain. Ask your doctor if a brain is right for you.
For more information, visit tryabrain.com.
Say, I wonder if Joe knows about that. Live from Times Square, it's That Kevin Show.
Somewhere in the bowels of the city that never sleeps,
Kevin McCullough, radio host with Salem Media,
is a man also not sleeping.
Syndicated radio talk show host Kevin McCullough.
And that guy would like a word with you.
Many of you know him from as Nostradamus.
Of course that Kevin Show is going to be great. The only thing that could be greater, of course, would be That Donald Show. We don't have that, so we have That Kevin Show.
Featuring the music of Dick Tunney and the Dream in Color Orchestra. Still to come, how is the NIH ripping you off? Jay Green from Heritage. Also, Gabriella Hoffman and a war on energy. Sketch comedy from Nick Peterson and Doodad, and Zach Williams back in the spotlight. From Times Square, a man who has often been favorably compared to Harrison Ford. No, not Patriot Games, not Han Solo. He's been compared to Red Hulk. Here's the
For Assignment Desk Weekend, I'm Kevin McCullough. Vice President J.D. Vance has just returned from giving a speech in Munich, Germany, where he staked out definitively American ideas on basic human rights like free speech. The comments seemed to fly in the face of common EU restrictions on speech. The vice president also handily addressed issues related to artificial intelligence, AI, with an in-depth passage detailing challenges with the technology and many of its benefits. The comment stood in stark contrast to his predecessor, who once showed the extent of her knowledge as being summed up by those in attendance as NAAI, not at all intelligent. New York City Mayor Eric Adams continues his overt cooperation with the Trump administration on the migrant crisis. Though previously the mayor had been supportive of the sanctuary state policies in effect, he seems to have had a change of heart as of recent. And it had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that the DOJ was willing to drop charges against him. Although Assignment Desk Weekend has learned he was actually holding out hope for a Hunter Biden special kind of pardon, allowing him to be cleared of anything he may do in the future. In the recent Four Nations hockey tournament, Canadian fans have taken to booing the American team during the American national anthem. Some have speculated that the connection is to the idea that the U.S. president has recently threatened tariffs on Canada for their willingness to let fentanyl invade America's northern border. In reality, though, the boos turned out to be occurring because the Canadian hockey team is just horrible. It keeps losing to the U.S. Poor babies. They also immediately apologized following a stern talking to. Those Canucks are so polite. And finally, in the news story that refuses to end, even though it centers on a movie called It Ends With Us, the two principals have turned down an offer at mediation. Assignment Desk Weekend has learned that Blake Lively was reported to have said, "But if we do that, I won't get any more free publicity or public sympathy." She is also hopeful that her gal pal, Taylor Swift, might someday eventually take her phone calls once again. For Assignment Desk Weekend, I'm Kevin McCullough. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, another edition of the award-winning broadcast, 3 Minutes with Nick Peterson.
What has really helped you more? The $30 billion we've sent, or... Yes, that. Well, hear me out. Or Ukrainian flags in our social media bios. The $30 billion for certain. Okay, so virtue signal not reaching Ukraine. No. Try 2 flags. President Zelensky, I'm so glad we could do this. See? And thank you to our interpreters. I flew a long way in the middle of a war for this interview, so I hope it's worth it. Worth it. Yes, your chief of staff is on top of things. Let's dive right in. So, obviously you have a lot of global support with over 40 countries providing financial aid, yet you're still begging for more. Is that right? Absolutely, and we need it more than ever given the powerhouse we're up against. In the eyes of the world, we look like Salvation Army at Christmas time, but it does look very David versus Goliath, except in this case, Goliath wears an Adidas jumpsuit. How confident are you through all of this? I'm very confident in our military, but unfortunately, we're facing a very trigger-happy nation. Yeah, well, we knew that. Their version of roulette ain't a casino game. Now, let's rewind to 2019. How did you receive over 73% of the popular vote as a comedian with 0 political experience? Well, you elected a reality star with 0 political experience also. Touche, but 73% voted for a man who dances in leather pants and high heels. Well, if you think that's impressive, you should see me play the drums. I will pass, but maybe try Ukraine's Got Talent. Now, tell me about your most recent meeting with President Biden. I bet nobody volunteered to be that interpreter. It felt like speaking with an old family member with brain damage at the nursing home. I do think you're taking advantage of Grandpa, who forgets how much birthday money he's already sent. My grandfather did not have money to give us on our birthdays, but instead made us Matonka dolls. Yeah, message lost in translation. Anywho, speaking of brain damage, President Biden. No, Hollywood denied your request to appear at the Oscars. Why'd you want to be there in the first place? Mainly for the connections. I only have a year left in my presidency, and I'd like to pitch a fantasy movie called The Ghost of Kiev. The mythological military hero. Correct, but in my version he will be a cross-dressing musician with a leather fetish. It's an odd yet specific sense of humor you have. You do remind me of that guy on TV. Starts with a B. Bon, yes? No, not quite Bon. Bean. Mr. Bean. You know Mr. Bean? I'm not familiar with who you're talking about, but I appreciate the compliment. Yeah, you're welcome. Well, you better win the war, or else you're gonna be watching your own movie on Netflix. No? Nothing? Okay, well, again, I appreciate you chatting with me, despite the language barrier. Thank you very much. Thank you. You are...
Gentlemen, it is Valentine's Day. It is time to refresh ourselves on the 5 love languages. I will explain it in a way that you lawn dads will understand. Number 1, acts of service. This is a lot like servicing your lawnmower, washing her down, polishing her up, cleaning out the clumps of clippings from under the deck, and of course, keeping her batteries charged. Number 2, words of affirmation. You are a powerful snowblower. You are the Picasso of shrubbery. Your stripes are like poetry in the grass. Your quick stick is extremely convenient. Number 3, and every man's favorite, physical touch. Yeah. Next, number 4, quality time. It's like when instead of doing the thing that you want to do, you do the thing that she wants to do instead. One-on-one, just the 2 of you. That is quality time. Number 5, gifts. Gifting is like lending out your 900 CFM leaf blower to your Gen Z neighbor so he can blow pollen off his Prius. Hey. You do it without expecting anything. I expect nothing of you.
Can I have it now?
Oh, sorry. This has been the 5 love languages. Now you can use these on your Valentine. Good luck.
Ready or not, we'll be right back. That Kevin. Now, back to that Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back to That Kevin Show from Times Square. See, it says so officially on the mug. That's how you know where you're at. It is so good to have you with us, and grateful to have back with us from the Independent Women's Forum someone who keeps a watch on all things related to energy, Gabby Hoffman, and we're so grateful to have her back. Gabby, it's good to see you. I just had, completely separate from the news that we're going to talk about, I just had a private phone call 3 days ago with a major, well, what was a small-sized domestic drilling company here in the U.S. They've just made a bunch of acquisitions, and they're going to have probably a 300% footprint from what they had before. And it's all about the excitement of the new energy direction that the country is going, the proposals of what's around the corner in terms of what we can do. A lot of people still don't realize it. We are the number one most energy rich country on the planet, and we have just been punishing ourselves for the last 4 years in not using any of it and paying very high prices to use dirty energy from other places. But I thought of you actually when I was on that call. I was like, I bet Gabby would be very excited about hearing some of this development. So thanks for coming back.
Of course. Yeah.
Mr. Zeldin, one of my favorite former congressmen, and he came this close to being governor here in New York, is the new EPA administrator. And he made news this week. What did he do?
He was able to retrieve and uncover that $20 billion, I believe, in loan guarantees, or not loan guarantees, that's actually Department of Energy, but he found $20 billion in green programs that were going to be appropriated to so-called green capital entities. And those can be traced back and are already being traced back to major Democratic donors. So this perpetual slush fund through the EPA to fund green capital, whether it's climate investments, clean energy projects that don't work but sound nice. And he announced that the 20 billion in golden bars that were missing have now been successfully retrieved. And he's not the only one. You're soon going to see Department of Energy, Chris Wright. You're going to probably see Interior Secretary Doug Burgum find a lot of problematic, ridiculous spending within their agencies. And these agencies aren't really typically associated with corruption, DOE certainly, but you never hear really much about Department of Interior. But under Biden-Harris, they were appropriating money for things and functions that had nothing to do with their mission statements. So EPA, of course, being one of the first to shine a light on all this wasteful spending, the others are going to follow suit. And it's not surprising that this was happening. Biden had a whole of government climate first approach versus energy first approach. And this is the consequence of that.
Yeah. You know, what's amazing is RFK, just coming onto the job, Tulsi Gabbard's just coming into the job. But with the heads that have already been appointed and approved and are already working, including the non-necessary for approval DOGE whole operation that they've got going on, you're seeing this story repeated in place after place after place. The National Institutes of Health are paying 60 cents on the dollar for overhead expenses to universities and hospitals when no private hospital or university pays more than 8% in terms of what they pay. And it's not just in one area. I said this in a tweet to or a private text to someone yesterday, but I really hold that it's true. It's like a malignancy that has attached onto the skeletal vortex of the entire country. Every department, every single area that the government works in, you've got these slush funds, you've got this, misappropriation of money, you've got this people just paying people off just to get things done. And who knows how much worse it would have gotten had the country not said, we're going to make a distinct change in November.
This is a consequence of the so-called job creation policies of Biden, where it's estimated, I believe, that he grew the federal workforce, mostly the private sector shrunk, and atrophied. But the public sector government workforce grew about 6%. So he hired lots and lots of federal workers, largely to occupy these very questionable programs, to oversee these slush funds, and just to occupy space primarily. And this is a consequence when you think the federal government is tasked with job creation. The federal workforce grew as a result, which is why people are now realizing, if they hadn't, how much wasteful spending was abound.
Yeah.
How much in wasteful programs. I mean, the climate stuff has notoriously been wastefully spent.
Right.
Same with energy programs. But now that it's being not only shown there, but across the whole of government, this is to be expected when you had, like I said, someone prioritizing the expansion of government over the private sector, creating rather a environment that's business friendly, because we don't want the government to be the largest facilitator of job creation. They just have to create an environment where it can flourish. But this is what happens when you had Biden and Harris, who were grow government first, no accountability, no transparency. And this is the consequence. So these new cabinet secretaries all across the board, and like I said, including in energy and conservation, they're coming in and they're discovering all this wasteful spending, too much overhead, looking to trim their workforce and to streamline the process further. And this is what needs to happen. It's been long overdue for several decades.
We haven't even begun to see what they're going to find in Health and Human Services and the Department of Education. But just knowing on the stories that I've reported on for the last 15 years, there are even bigger departments with even bigger slush funds that are yet to be found. And I just think that by the time we get all of this rooted out, where there's going to be a lot of federal workers that are going to have to go find jobs that, they actually have to do something at. No more of just sitting around and getting a paycheck sent to your home. But at the end of the day, we're going to be so much better off because of it. And I just hope that we do the thorough job, because like cancer, I use that correlation in a very fair way, because like cancer, you have to root out all of the malignancy. You have to go find all of it. Anyway, if you leave like one cell going somewhere, it'll all come back. You've got to go and you've got to root it out, and it's got to be something that the voters demand on a regular basis. I was just reminded of thinking of the, and this was a Doge, I think, discovery this week, but we were giving money to terrorist organizations, like just flat out charities that terrorists use to raise money for their operations. We were cutting them checks, and nobody said anything about it. Really remarkable. Your expertise is energy. How much has changed already in the transfer of the Biden administration to the Trump administration? And we'll get started on this, and then we'll continue after the break. But what are you most pleased or most concerned about?
I'm very encouraged by this abandoning of this whole of government-wide net zero first, climate first posturing. Now it's energy abundance, reliability, energy security. And that really is a mammoth change in how energy policy should be executed. So having that change witnessed all across the board, that language is slowly disappearing, moving towards more positive language that would encourage energy development that is also coupled with true conservation efforts, this protection of the environment that we often hear about, but that doesn't actually work. It actually claims to put nature above people instead of having nature and people on an equal footing. And so even with all this robust energy development that we've been promised, which is soon to happen, it's going to take a little bit. Prices are a little high, not because of this existing administration, but because of inflationary pressures from the previous administration that are still hanging over. But I'm encouraged by the change in prioritization. Trump has great people at the helm of his Department of Interior, Burgum, as I mentioned, Chris Wright, who actually has energy industry experience. I don't think across the board. Previously, we had someone like that who's very innovative, understands the dynamic at play. He's going to work in concert with Doug Burgum in this proposed, or soon to be, I would say, unleashed National Energy Council. So they're really looking forward to supercharging that. And I think we'll start to see prices go down within 6 to 9 months realistically.
Gabby Hoffman, Independent Women's Forum, thank you so much. Kevin McCullough, much more straight ahead.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough. From New York, That Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back. Kevin McCullough, Times Square. Times Square uses a lot of electricity. We use a lot of electricity. I bet our overhead for Times Square is pretty high, but I bet it's not 60% of the cost of the operations for what's going on. And yet that's what universities have been asking the National Institutes of Health to pay for their overhead on research. Jay Green is a senior research fellow and former university professor, now with the Heritage Foundation, serving us. And Jay, you were just talking about the real corruption that has crept into this area of our government and funding. And this is in the midst of we're finding out all these things that we're funding that are garbage. The thing that struck me when you were talking about the price, the percentage going up. So it was 8% at the end of World War II. It's 60% now. And yet in an era where a lot of overhead is becoming cheaper, right? So in the 80s and 90s, if you had high speed internet, you were probably using like T1 lines and using a lot of very bulky bandwidth options to get like high speed internet into your research facility. Whereas now it's all fiber optic, and it's nothing in terms of cost, in terms of what it used to cost. So surely being good stewards that universities should be, and hospitals and other parts of the NIH, these organizations, if they went from paying for 6 T1 lines to go into a laboratory, now they can get the same thing through one fiber optic cable. Surely they're passing that cost on back to the taxpayers, right?
So, there should be economies of scale. That is, as the research infrastructure was built out, and that's why the federal government was paying for overhead early on, it was committed to making sure that universities had a research infrastructure. But as that infrastructure was built out, it should have been that the overhead rate would go down, but instead it's gone up. Which is the opposite of economies of scale. Similarly, the universities that currently get more in grants charge a higher overhead rate than the universities that get less. And that makes no sense. It should be that the places that have more money for research should be able to spread the fixed cost of research over a larger base and then have a lower rate for overhead. But they have a higher rate for overhead, which suggests that this is accounting shenanigans and not actual cost.
Let me ask this question before we go on to like some more specific examples, because I'm dying to know what all of this is turning into. Are the people that have been doing this accounting, does this cross the line into criminality? Is this criminal behavior, criminal defrauding of the federal government, where they're just flat out lying on their receipts and forms and everything else that they have to justify in order to get the funding?
It does appear to be in direct violation of guidance that was even offered by the Biden administration on what these funds could be used for. So they are using it as a slush fund, and they use it to cross-subsidize lots of other things at the universities that advance either their personal ambition or their political agendas. Now, this has been a standard practice for so long, everyone feels okay about it, but it's not right. And the Trump administration has said, look, rather than pay 60% overhead rates, we're going to pay 15%. And 15%, by the way,
which is still almost double what it was at the end of World War II.
That's right. And that number was not picked out of a hat. As it turns out, private foundations also pay for research, and none of them, virtually none of them, pay more than 20%. More than 15% for research overhead. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Soros's Open Society Foundation, the Walton Family Foundation, billionaires, when they purchase research from universities, they pay 15% overhead or less. Some of them pay zero. Okay, and universities take their money, but they demand that taxpayers pay 4 times as much as Bill Gates does. And so that suggests that they, again, are inflating their overhead and using it to cross-subsidize nonsense.
Before we went on the air, you were talking about the fact that the NIH extends these grants to other institutions outside of academic institutions. What other types of institutions are getting this money?
So hospitals also are engaged in conducting medical research, and so they can also be recipients of these grants. People will point to some important innovations that have been accomplished with NIH funding, important pharmaceutical products that we...
Let's take a quick break. I want you to go deeper on this. We'll come back on the other side of this. Jay Green is my special guest from the Heritage Foundation, and if your head's not exploding yet, I don't know what it'll take. Stay with us.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough. Here he is from New York. That Kevin McCullough.
Final few minutes with Jay Green of the Heritage Foundation, and very glad to have him with us. Jay, this is some mind-blowing, eye-opening stuff that you're telling us, but it basically amounts to people that know how to do it robbing the American people blind on grants and saying that things cost way more than they cost, and they're telling us that they need it for their research when in reality they're paying very little on what they're calling overhead, and then they're using the rest of it to back other causes. You were just beginning to touch, though, on how hospitals are in this equation, and I want you to pick up from where we left off there, because it's not just the universities that are benefiting.
Sure. I mean, so scientific research does yield innovations in pharmaceuticals, innovations in surgical procedures, and we do benefit from those innovations. However, there are private companies that also benefit from those innovations. It results in drugs that major pharmaceutical companies then sell to us. So we pay for the innovation multiple times. We pay for it when we pay for the overhead on the research, and then the research, and then again when we have to pay the pharmaceutical companies or the hospital chains for those innovations when we receive the drugs or the procedures. And so the question is, how many times are taxpayers going to have to pay for this? There's also the matter that we also pay for it when we give taxes to our state government to appropriate money to the state university to build their buildings. So we're paying for those buildings again. Or when private donors give money to the university, then they're also getting those buildings paid for. So how many times are we going to pay for the same building? There are expensive pieces of equipment used in research, but those can be allocated specifically to the research projects and made a direct expense of the research, not an overhead expense. The problem with overhead expense is that it's unaccountable. It's a slush fund that administrators use for whatever they want.
What are some of the things that we've caught them using it for?
So, I mean, this was a couple decades ago, but Stanford was using this overhead money to purchase a yacht, to redecorate the office of their president. I mean, so there's that kind of like obvious corruption.
Well, doesn't that benefit the quality of the research to buy a yacht?
Well, maybe they take out donors on the yacht and it helps them raise money. But these things are not really related to research, is the point.
Or actual overhead.
Right, actual overhead. And they're also using it currently. I mean, Columbia University currently brags that it uses the money to cross-subsidize PhDs in the humanities. Well, you know, the money's not for that. The money's supposed to be for conducting research on medical science. And it's not a slush fund for universities to decide that, you know, it wants to have PhDs in colonial studies or, you know, gender studies or whatever it wants to have, and that we're supposed to pay for it through tax dollars in the NIH.
Did I read, and maybe it wasn't NIH, but I thought I read something this last week that one of the major universities, and I think it may have been Columbia, were actually using either NIH grants or maybe USAID or something, FEMA, something. It was coming from somewhere, maybe Department of Education, and they actually didn't have a line item for what they claimed they needed it for, but they were pouring it into DEI and political awareness activism on their campus in ways that I don't think that you're supposed to do that with that type of funding.
We actually have observed that for every $100 million in overhead that universities get, they hire an additional 15 and a half DEI staff. So that tells you one of the things they're doing with this extra money is they're building out their DEI bureaucracy. So they whatever kind of nonsense they wish to indulge, they can do it with this slush fund of taxpayers.
And the problem is primarily that money is not specifically allocated for something direct. Like if they had a receipt and said, we need this computer that does this and it costs this much, that would be more explainable than just saying,
that's right.
This is what we're doing.
We want accountability. Accountability means that if researchers need expensive equipment or expensive labs, they should itemize those expenses more and not just list them in overhead or claim they're in overhead, and then you actually use that overhead as a slot fund for other things.
So what's the solution here? How do we pull this back? How do we fix it?
So the Trump administration has said they're not going to pay 60 cents on the dollar for overhead. They're going to pay 15 cents on the dollar. And now a federal judge has put this on hold with an injunction yesterday.
Why? Does the judge not live in America? Does he love throwing money into the fireplace, please?
So I think some of the dispute is over the application of this reduction to already existing grants. So there may be a dispute about whether there has been a contract already made and whether that contract can be changed. And honestly, this is beyond my depths of legal understanding.
Right.
But it feels to me like this is going to somehow get worked out. Eventually, the Trump administration's clever, and I think that they understand how to have an opening bid and then figure out how to get to a good solution. And I think that they have signaled to the universities that they need to cut out this nonsense. And one way or another, it is going to get reduced. And we're going to see something closer to 15 cents on the dollar than 60 cents on the dollar.
I mean, I hate to sound like the real, cheapwad that I probably am, but I don't want to give them 15 cents on the dollar if I still don't know where it's going. Like, I would like to see electric bills and, your broadband bill and let's make them cough up the actual proof of what that overhead stuff is running before we cut them anything. Make them pay in advance and we reimburse them. That's what normal companies do when employees have expenses. They spend out of pocket and then the company reimburses them, but they get a receipt and they get a date and a time and something that happened and they have an ability to prove it. We certainly should have that kind of expectation from a government that has been so wildly out of control.
So the challenge is that overhead is supposed to be stuff that you can't easily allocate to a specific project. So if it's a general expense, like if they have roads that go through the university and which research project benefits from which portion of the road, there are things that are hard to allocate. The question is, how much of that is there? They can allocate actually more than they currently are, and being forced to itemize their expenses makes them more accountable because then they have to produce the receipts.
That's what I like.
Spent it on that.
That's what you and I have to do before that IRS rebate check comes. Anyway, Jay Green doing fantastic work with the Heritage Foundation. Thanks for breaking all this down for us. Really appreciate it.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me on.
You got it. Kevin McCullough coming right back from Times Square. Don't go away.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough.